All right. So we're going to talk about the Buddha's teachings, which is Buddha's observations about reality, basically, about what is true and what is not, what is real, what is not, what is virtuous, what is not. So we can recognize all this rubbish in our minds, get rid of the rubbish, grow all the goodness, and be useful to others. Think like that. So what are we talking about here? How to loosen the grip of ego grasping by understanding karma and emptiness. Okay. All right. How delicious. Okay. All right, so then we talked a bit about karma last night. And what we're talking about, as I said, what we're talking about is Buddha's observations about how things exist. And as we mentioned last night, Buddha's deal is, what is observed is, we don't need a creator. It's an unnecessary embellishment. It's an idea we made up. But also, same philosophy, we don't need a little thing called a little I in there that runs the show, which the Christians call a soul, the Hindus call an atma, and we in psychology, the West, call a self, an I. And Buddha says we over-exaggerate it. It's a load of nonsense. So there's various ways to see the truth of that. And one of the most marvellous is the first level of it, is to understand karma, which means the law of cause and effect, So how does that help us understand karma? How does that understand emptiness? How does that help? Well, if you look into how you feel, we mentioned last night, Lama Yeshe calls ego the self-pity me. They're so tasty, so precise. The more we become familiar with our minds, the more we notice what is underpinning or informing the feelings. We talk about feelings. When we're angry, we talk about the feeling, which usually means it's the body. When it hits the body, that's when we know we feel something. That's why people who get depressed don't know it until they can't get out of bed one morning, because it's all internal. A person who's angry knows it in 1 millisecond because it vomits out the mouth. Everyone can see, they're angry. But when the body's involved, that's when we notice. Because in our world, with our model of the mind, which is it's the brain, and you need a microscope to see it, then we don't have methods. Now, a bit with therapy and things, it's fantastic. We don't really have methods, not in the way the Buddha has, to observe the information in the mind. And the Buddha's key point is that, it's thoughts. Thoughts. It all comes down to thoughts, concepts that inform those emotions. So that's why we have to get some concentration. That's why we have to have Buddha's model of the mind under our belt. And then when we have these two tools, we then can observe, begin to listen to the insane stories that informs these unhappy emotions. And this is Buddha's key point, how the mind works, So every millisecond of these, as I've said, sows seeds and will bring fruits similar to the seeds, like all seeds. So when we look at how we talk to ourselves when we're angry, jealous, depressed, resentful, self-hate, you just have to listen to the stories, like you have to keep a journal, like your internal journal, hear what they're saying, and you'll hear every story is self-pity. Poor me, who's badly done by, no one loves me, it's not fair, I don't deserve it, I didn't ask to get born, it's her fault, it's his fault, it's their fault, it's his fault. That's the way ego talks. That's the way I sounds. So the way to counteract that sense of a hopeless self-pity me, you didn't ask to get born, to whom things happen unfairly, that's how it feels. It's a whole story. It's an elaborate story our mind, our delusions have made up. So the more we can hear that, and then what we have is we listen to Buddha's teachings. Well, listen, hey baby, you did in fact ask to get born. In fact, you created yourself. Don't look anywhere else. Look in here. You are the fruit. You're the fruit of your own past handiwork. So the more you think that, and then you get the nuts and bolts of karma, when someone's mean to you, well, guess what, Robina? You must have been mean to them, baby. Right there, the self-pity stops if you're able to take it on board. So thinking about karma, attacks the self-pity, which loosens the grip of that self-pity, which is the voice of ego. So it's a perfect first way to begin, and it's already advanced, to begin to unpack and unravel and loosen the grip of this poor self-pity me, which is another way of saying understanding dependent arising in order to realize emptiness. All Buddha's teachings, they're programmed beautifully. When you study in the monasteries and in our system, everything is geared. Everything's priming our mind ready to finally understand the point about emptiness. It's Buddha's heart practice, heart teaching to get us out of the mess, Of course, if you're on the Bodhisattva path, you add bodhicitta to the mix and you become a Buddha and help others. So this, karma is the first level, is an example of the first level of dependent arising. As Lama Yeshe says, dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. So there's lots of things we have to understand here. Let's just talk about it, So, first of all, dependent arising, Lama Tsongkhapa, our lineage Lama, is he here somewhere? Can we see him? Is he somewhere? Over here. All of these ones are all of him, aren't they?
On the merit field.
In the merit field.
In the middle of the merit field.
Oh, okay. Lama Tsongkhapa is like our patron saint. 14th century. Lama Tsongkhapa, lineage Lama, our lineage Lama, the Gelupas, our tradition of our Lamas, the lineage of the teachings that we're listening to here, where I've got my teachings from my Lamas. And we track them all back to Tsongkhapa. Of course, we track it all back to the Buddha. But the style, so Lama Tsongkhapa's big deal, his expertise is the two truths. Buddha's teaching about dependent arising. The king of logics, as Lama Yeshe puts it so nicely, to prove the truth, that there is no I from its own side. So dependent arising, you can present it in different ways, and one kind of classical presentation is the three levels of dependent arising. And roughly speaking, you could say these three levels of dependent arising, are equivalent to the three, they're like the arguments against the three mistakes, the three levels of the mistakes that ego grasping makes in asserting an I that doesn't exist, according to the different Buddhist level, different teachings in Buddhism, And we'll go into this. The first one, like I said, is the first level of dependent arising is that things exist in dependence upon causes and conditions. So look at the universe as we know it. Well, this is what we call science. It's all, everybody knows logically the cause of a clay lid. You have to have a series of things that you put together and boom, you get a lid, You have a series of things you put together, you get a rose. Everything in the universe that we know is the product of the law of cause and effect. Okay, we don't talk like that, but it's evidently true, isn't it? We know this, and we know that it has to be accurate. You can't be vague about the cake recipe. Look at the effort people put into books for cakes, They test and test and test to get it to be absolutely valid, not one mistake, to get the correct recipe, Cause and effect. It's called cause and effect. So the same level of clarity and precision and depth of analysis that we know we need to even make a cake, forget about realizing relativity, is exactly what Buddha says we need to use, to employ, to understand the way, to understand the, and to get rid of suffering. To get rid of suffering. So because why? Because we suffer, Buddha says, because of delusions, neuroses in the mind. Well, actually, if we look at the Four Noble Truths, in the second Noble Truth, the Buddha pins down two main causes of suffering. And they're called karma and delusions. And they're subsumed down to the one. Delusions. The neuroses in the mind. So to understand this, in order to understand karma, in order to understand the first level of dependent arising, the king of logics to prove emptiness, in order to realize emptiness, which gets us out of samsara, we need to understand what is suffering. We need to understand what is the mind. These words, we have to get our definitions clear, using this clarity in order to do all the right things, And this is a surprise to us because we don't think of spiritual practice like this. We think of it as airy-fairy, beyond words, whole belief, visions, blah, blah, Superstitious nonsense. It demands you've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama Yeshe says. We've got to squeeze our brains, okay? So first, to get all this clear, the Four Noble Truths, the third one, Buddha says we can be free of suffering. That's what he means by nirvana, cessation of the causes of suffering, And its suffering and its causes. So if you can be free of suffering, which sounds marvellous, I'd love that, please, thank you. But know what suffering is. First Noble Truth. So Buddha talks about three kinds of suffering, three levels of suffering. We have to recognize what these are in order to be sick of them, in order to apply the methods to stop the causes of them, which is these two, karma and delusions. And then do the fourth noble truth, which is the methods of how to get rid of suffering. So understanding karma, and I'm saying the mind, like I said yesterday, these are almost the main, the kind of the nuts and bolts of all of Buddha's teachings. We have to be clear about in order to apply them all, in order to get rid of suffering, to identify suffering and get rid of it. And then, of course, to get compassion on the basis of this so we can help others get free of suffering, So suffering, many ways of talking. The first kind of suffering, which everybody agrees with, is called, Buddha calls it the suffering of suffering. And basically, as far as we're concerned, it's when the bad things happen. There's a simple way to say it, to frame it. It's really clear. And the universe accepts this completely. Look at the dog when it doesn't get the food. Look at the dog when it gets kicked in the teeth. Look at the person when you get abused. Look at every sentient being. We can all agree instantaneously that that's what we call suffering. From the mildest level of the red lights coming when you don't want them to being abused or whatever, It's when we get what we don't want. So another way to frame it, which sounds kind of cruel, but it's a really excellent way to do it. Go to the second noble truth, and we look at the causes of suffering, Buddha pins it down to two. Given the law of cause and effect, there are many, many things that have to come together to produce a lid, to produce a flower, to produce a microphone, to produce a moment of suffering. Many things have to come together to produce one moment of suffering. But Buddha narrows it down in the second noble truth to two main causes. And he mentions these two because they're the ones that if we change these, we can quit suffering. They're the main causes, the central ones. And they're called karma, which is called, we said last night, action. And every millisecond of what your mind does is an action, a mental action. And often many of those actions, as we know, are carried out. Their wishes are carried out by the servants of the mind, which is the body and speech, And so it manifests as all kinds of seeds in the mind that ripen in those four ways we talked last night. A type of rebirth, an experience, a tendency, and an environmental result. Every millisecond of every thought, naturally, it's a natural law. Natural law. No one makes it happen, no one's running the show, no one's punishing, no one's rewarding. We're doing it to ourselves. That's the point. So, karma and delusions. So a negative, like we said last night, a negative action, starting with there being the object, the mouse, then the second one, intention, and then the recognition, that's the mouse, intention, I will kill that mouse, third, motivation, anger, and then 3, you do the action, and 4, the result, dead mouse, and you rejoice. That's a complete action, a negative action of killing. And what makes it negative, like we talked last night, the crucial piece, the crucial one, is the motivation. That's that's what makes it negative. We have to hear this, to think it, logically understand it, not just believe it. That's superstition. So a negative action is one that harms another that's motivated by a delusion, put it that way. It's assumed down to the two. The delusion is the main cause. Having the delusion in the mind in the first place is what causes the hand to kill. The hand's just a dumb animal. It does nothing. It's just a bunch of flesh, but it's driven by the mind and goes and harms the mouth. Same with virtue. It's, the wish to benefit drives the hand into the pocket, picks up the money and gives it to the beggar. The hand can't do it on its own. That's a joke. Dead hands can't give money. Dead hands can't kill mice, believe me. So the mind is the point, the delusion. And it's there every millisecond. And because 99% of us instinctive, because we practice this rubbish for eons, we don't even notice that everything we do is driven by the mind. It's a shock to us, shock. We call it instinct, It's because we've done it that often, it's second nature. That's why we have to plumb the depths of our mind, to unpack and unravel the contents, to get to see this clearly. So the suffering of suffering. Okay, we look at the second noble truth, the suffering of that's called the suffering. No, sorry, the second noble truth is the causes. So the causes are negative action motivated by a delusion. Get it down to the delusion. So now, effectively in day-to-day life, as Lord Buddha says, as Rinpoche points out, the main cause of suffering in day-to-day life is attachment. The biggest surprise to us is cute word, attachment, you know. But it is multifaceted. And as Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about it for one whole year. You will never begin to understand it until you start going deep inside to unpack. Well, he didn't say unpack, but to build something up inside. It's really true. Such a simple word, you know. We've got to put meat on the bones by thinking, analysing, watching carefully and seeing its multifacets. This is the main cause of suffering in daily life. Rinpoche's chapter in his death book, you know, one you can download for free, fpmt.org/death, third title down, that one. You know, in this he says in the chapter there about attachment. The main cause of suffering at the time of death is attachment. Because, you know, throughout the life, we're driven by it. It's the motor that propels us from second to second. It underpins every millisecond of every thought and every action we do. We are, in fact, born in a body created by attachment, in a universe which is the product of attachment. This, you know, the more we understand the evolution of universes and things, and evolution of bodies and beings, we'll get this, we'll understand this. It's massive, it's vast. So, the more we understand attachment, you know, in order to understand attachment, we need to understand the model of the mind, Buddha's model, and then when we do understand attachment, that informs us about the second kind of suffering, in the First Noble Truth, the suffering of change. And then we'll understand, using attachment as our basis, that suffering of suffering is basically when attachment doesn't get what it wants. That's by definition what a bad thing is, because attachment runs the show. Attachment's the default mode. Attachment's the assumption that I must get what I want every millisecond. And it must be only the nice things. Attachment's a junkie for the nice things. It only can bear the nice things. The millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, which means the ugly things, panic attack. That's called aversion. And we run between attachment and aversion 1,000 times a day. Naturally, it's just samsara. Join the club, people. Animals, ants, dogs, hell beings, gods, humans, we're all in the thrall of this model. Attachment and aversion. The extent to which attachment gets what it wants, we call that happiness. That's the second Noble Truth. Sorry, the second kind of suffering in the First Noble Truth, the suffering of change. And then up the spectrum, or down the spectrum, to the nightmare of never getting what attachment wants, which is the hell realms, or the spirits, or the animals, and the suffering we have in a human realm. That's what not getting what attachment wants is. It's a nightmare of pain and suffering on the basis of the fact of the presence of attachment in the mind. So Buddha's view of it is insanely vast. Not like we think, oh, I like chocolate cake, I must be attached. Not like that. Way more profound, way more nuanced, way more subtle. And therefore way, way harder than we ever imagined to get rid of it. So be patient and humble with yourself. Way to go, you know, before we get rid of it. So the suffering is suffering. And we can talk about it in two ways. From a big picture point of view, it's the lower realms, total, never getting anything that's nice, so living in a nightmare of hell. Terrible, immense suffering. Or we can look at it in the context of this life, when the bad things happen. Just have a look at it. Look at it. The millisecond the bad thing happens. The millisecond my leg gets uncomfortable, it's called suffering, so I move it. The millisecond my belly rumbles, it's called suffering, so you stuff something in the mouth. The millisecond someone says a mean word to you, you have a panic attack. Because why? Because the default assumption is I must get what I want every second. It's unspoken. It's so primordial. It drives us. So the way they say it is the deepest, most energetic level of the suffering of attachment, and we're born with all this, we're conceived with it, is the energy of dissatisfaction, is the main energy of attachment. Dissatisfaction. The more strong it is, the more we naturally hanker after something, crave something. The assumption being I'm missing something. That's what dissatisfaction is, isn't it? Missing something. And when we look at our mind, every millisecond, there's always a feeling of missing something. Something's missing. feeling miserable, feeling no good, no matter what I get, what I want, what I do, what I see, what I hear. We're never satisfied. We're like bottomless pits. That's what that junkie is the best way to say it. Attachment is the junkie mind. We're all junkies. It's just a question of degree. That's all. That's not kidding. It's not being smart. It's a fact from Buddha's perspective. So dissatisfaction. Therefore craving, hankering. And then we use our creative ability, our creative mind, which is attachment energy, to think of all the things and imagine them and want them and then pursue them and get them. And when we get it, when we see it, you see the chocolate cake, the next function of it. So the first one is dissatisfaction. Then the craving is a function of dissatisfaction. Then the craving and the imagining it is attachment. And then when the attachment sees the object, what it does is make the object look way more delicious than it really is. It embellishes it. And then when you get the object in the right hole, you don't put your cake here, and we know you've got to put this hole here. We don't make a mistake. This is the hole it goes in. Get it in there, anticipation, expectation for the pleasure to come, the satisfaction to come. Pleasure does come, but satisfaction doesn't come. So you put a second piece in, and a third, and a fourth. And what happens? Great distress. Your stomach is stuffed full. But the mind is still a vampire, still a predator, still a junkie, not satisfied. And what's left now? Misery. So the suffering of suffering is not having the cake. Suffering of change is getting the cake. And why is it called the suffering of change? For the simplest reason that the more cake you get, the more revolting it becomes, which then turns into the suffering of suffering. This is the tragedy of it. We know this, but we can't bear to think about it, because the only way we know how to trigger good feelings is to get the cake. So we kind of ignore the fact that all it brings is more misery. It's like the only way we get pleasure is by being punched first, you know? It's the only way we know it. Or you get punched at the end. Get your cake and then you get punched. We have to put up with it. No choice. We don't know how else to get pleasure, you know? So you need to understand this simple process of the wanting and the thinking about and the getting and the having of the cake is already profound, you know. It means we have to understand attachment. We have to understand what good feelings are, what pleasure is. Clarity, be clear, the definitions, the terms, exactly. Like when you do studying science or make a cake, you can't just be vague and mystical. Be precise. So if the suffering is suffering, is when the bad things happen. And Buddha says we can get rid of suffering. Remember the third noble truth? Oh, great. Well, to get rid of it, you've got to know what caused it. You'll never get rid of a problem until you know the cause of it. So we go to the second noble truth, and he tells us the causes are a negative karma and delusions that inform that negative karma. So the negative karma that caused me to get bad things happen, like someone punches me in the nose, we deduce, I must have punched them in the nose. So do I want that kind of suffering? No thanks. Well, what's the solution? Oh, I better stop punching. Simple enough. Easy deduction. So you want to stop the first kind of suffering, back off, do junior school practice, back off and leave sentient beings alone and stop harming them. Very simple. Junior school level of practice. Buddha exhorts us to not kill, not lie, not steal, not this, not that, not that. Simple. What Buddha calls a negative action. Don't harm others. That's the solution for you to stop the gross level of suffering. Not complicated. Quicker than a cake recipe. A few points. Shall I say it slower? I have this terrible anxiety. I'll never have enough time to fit everything in. That's why I talk fast. When Lama Zopa first told me to teach, I got extremely nervous. I thought I'm going to run out of words. And then I figured, well, if I run out of words, I'll just say, okay, questions. Works fine. Okay, are we communicating here?
Yes.
We're doing a whole lot of things all at once, you know? All the bits and pieces of a puzzle, putting them together. So we've got to first, in order to stop suffering, which is to do the methods in the fourth noble truth, you've got to be sick of suffering. You'll never stop doing something if you're not sick of it. And you can only be sick of suffering, you know what it is. And you can only be free of it if you know what causes it. It's sort of logical, you know. So we have to know what he means by suffering. So the first kind, like I said, is not complicated. We all know. Ask the questions. Do you like being punched, lied to, stolen from, kicked, having your partner taken, harmed, raped, you name it. Being starving, not having any money, being thrown out of your home. Name it. Simple, ordinary, uncomplicated in this world, in this life of the human life. We know the answer is no. We know it is unbearable. You have to accept that fact. It's unbearable. Then you should go, well, I wonder what the hell caused it, you know. But what we do is, well, you caused it, and he caused it, and Marlborough caused the cancer, and these people caused that, and my ex-wife caused that. And we go blame them and sort of make them suffer. Because we're completely on the wrong track, Buddha says. We're mad people looking out there. We should be looking in here. That's why Bodhisattvas have so much compassion for us. We're as thick as posts. We don't realise we caused it. That we are this self-creation, as His Holiness calls it, you know, the law of karma. We should be blissed out to discover that the main cause of my suffering is my own past actions. Well, guess what? If I'm being lied to, that's the suffering called the experiences similar to the cause, like we talked last night. When the bad things happen to us by other people, pretty much that's one. Get lied to, stolen from, kicked in the teeth, harmed, jumped on by the wrong person. Let's look at it. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's what attachment doesn't want. That's how you define it. We all know it's horrible. And what we should do is, what caused this? Our first instinct is you caused it. She caused it. They caused it. Of course we do. Naturally. That's the view of ego grasping. It's programmed in us for eons. As I said, don't blame your Jewish or your Catholic mother for telling you this. No. This mind is what created the Christian teaching about God. Is what creates the dualistic view of my mother made me. It's what creates the dualistic view of she caused me harm by punching me. It's a mistaken conception, Buddha says. It's a misconception. It's a lie. It isn't true. It's really hard to hear this, but this is the first one. First noble truth. Suffering of suffering. First one of the first noble truth. And that's the bad stuff. We know we don't like it. Guess what caused it? You, Robina, must have done it in the past. It's not a complicated deduction. It's just that we can't stand it. It gives us a panic attack, you know. Of course, we can then extrapolate and talk about happiness, same logic. We never do. Like I said last night, no one ever bothers to ask, why does happiness happen? We don't care why. Just greedily give me more, please, because I deserve it. So the assumption behind not liking suffering is we think we don't deserve it. And the assumption behind never asking what causes happiness is because we assume we deserve it. That itself is a misconception, Buddha says. A load of rubbish. You deserve a flower if you grew it. So if you grew the weed, you deserve it. And you grew the flower, you deserve that too. Absolutely. So it's not complicated. It's just that it's so opposite to the instinctive belief we have in our bones now. It's really hard to hear it. And extremely hard to apply it when attachment doesn't get what it wants. When the junkie is thwarted. So we have to study the teachings, analyse it carefully, listen to it, think about it, meditate on it until the penny drops, you know. So the method to get rid of the first kind of suffering, you can't do it now. So you just got punched. It's too late to stop the suffering. It just happened. But you can learn from it. It's a learning experience. So what's this? You go, okay, do I like being punched? No. What caused it? Well, I must have punched. Oh, dear. Do I want more punches? No. Well, then, Robina, solution, stop punching. It's not complicated. A few little points. That's it. That's your practice. That's practice. And that's junior school in Lord Buddha's teachings. In the first, scope of the lamb rib, as they call it. I prefer to call it junior school. And he gets us to back off and stop harming others. It's really not complicated. And again, remember, not because he says so. Jesus' teachings are because he says so. Don't kill, he says. Why? Because I say so, baby. All right, nothing wrong with that. But not the reason Buddha says. No, he's just a messenger. You don't stop smoking because your doctor tells you. And then equally, you don't go home and you see there's no doctor. Oh, she won't see me. I won't get cancer. Start smoking your Marlboros again. No, that's the childish view of the doctor's the boss and she'll punish you with cancer if you smoke. That's the view we have of morality. It's kind of infantile. It's pathetic, Buddha says. Well, he's politer than that. So, solution, behave nicely. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, bare minimum, you know. Don't badmouth people, don't use your body and speech to harm others, basically. And that's the main first level. Then when you get more, you start to grow into this, you start to join the dots and you go, well, that also must mean I shouldn't have 14 pieces of cake. Doesn't harm anybody else except you, because the reason you're going to stop killing and lying and stealing is because you don't want suffering. You've got to get this, and this takes time. We feel guilty thinking that. We think, oh, that sounds selfish. Yep, it's selfish. Well done. It's more sensible than the other one, which is harming others to get what you want. At least this will help you. Be practical. That means we have to understand suffering and be sick of it. And you can only, and then the second part is you've got to know what caused it. That's renunciation. Renunciation has two parts. First, I'm sick up to here with suffering. Everybody's up to here with suffering. But then we go, well, who caused it? And he did and she did, on the wrong track. Here, the second part of renunciation is when the penny drops. Guess what? Now I know what causes it. My karma, my delusions. Solution, stop doing it. It's logical. You're sick of bellyache. You know the cake caused it. Solution, stop eating the cake. It's hardly complicated. So renunciation is that. Two parts. Sick of suffering, I know what causes it. And then naturally the next step comes, I better stop doing those actions. Why? Because I don't want suffering. We've got to make that deduction. Not, oh, I'm guilty, I shouldn't harm others, blah, 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 compassion. Not yet. That's university. We're only in junior school here. It's a really important one. And of course we're using Lord Buddha's Four Noble Truths as our basis here, as your hypothesis, right? Because we can't see, we're not clairvoyant, we can't see that that's the cause of why you punched me. We're taking this as a hypothesis. Got to start somewhere. That's to stop the first kind of suffering. Back off, leave sentient beings alone, mind your own business. This is junior school, and I'll tell you, it's already sublime. Already sublime. It means back off and mind your own business. My favourite way to put it. Back off and mind your own business. Get your head out of other people's heads. Who cares what they say? Who cares what they do? They're not your business. Delusions are like vampires. They're like evil vampires who go out and suck everyone's blood. Delusions are obsessed with others. Disgusting, repulsive, disgusting. You know. Back off and mind your own business. Others out there are just a catalyst for you to see your mind. Be so grateful to them. My favourite saying to myself, I've got two, when I read all my papers and my books and my magazines and my Vanity Fairs and my Vogues and my Peoples and my Time magazine and Newsweek and New Yorker and The Economist and New York Times and Financial Times and the Melbourne Age. That's my reading matter for the month. For the day, actually. I'm a junkie for human beings. So every time I read about the ugly stuff, the mean, you know, the usual one, the righteous one, oh, look at them doing that. Look at that pedophile. Look at that terrorist. Look at that maniac politician. Look at that thief, you know. No. Who do you think you are? You know, you're so special. Don't have compassion yet. That's too advanced. First you go, I say to myself, I recognise that. And then I'm quiet. Or I go, thank you for showing me how not to be. So you make the wisdom wing, this is the first stage of the wisdom wing practice, which is junior school, the lower scope, back off and don't harm others, work on your own mind. You bring it back to yourself. You take the learning from it for yourself. That's the wisdom wing practice. You're the one here. You're the one who's trying to develop yourself. The wisdom wing is all about you. It's like the retreat mode. It's got zero to do with sentient beings. That's compassion wing. Get out of their faces, get out of their heads, stop criticising, stop labelling. No, do criticise, do label, but take the lesson for yourself. You see people angry, you go, oh my God, thank you for showing me how not to be. Straight away you get the lesson. You see thieves and liars and pedophiles and terrorists and bombers and murderers, don't be superior. We've all done every single negative action since the beginning of this time, 1,000,000 times, Buddha says. Join the club. Be so relieved you can actually recognise and see the suffering. That's compassion, but not there yet. You see, thank you for showing me how not to be. I recognise that. There's no delusion in their minds that you haven't got in yours. That's a fact. Lord Buddha's view of the mind refers to all sentient beings. Animals, worms, slugs, hell beings. Same model. So it's a great, massive learning for you, you know. That's the wisdom wing. Then you really get the point about what is suffering and what are the causes. And then I'm going to stop this. Sick of this. I don't want punches. I don't want killed. I don't want raped. I don't want murder. I don't want, forget lower realms. Thank you very much. Sick of it. Stop causing it, you know. That's it. That's renunciation. And well, you know what it is? It's grown up. On the renunciation one, you're becoming grown up. You're becoming self-respectful. A renounced person it sounds depressing, you know. Renounced. No, you're blissful when you're renounced. You're blissful, you're happy, you're joyful, you're fulfilled, you're content, you're brave, you own your own rubbish, you own your own goodness. You don't blame others. You stop being a victim. You stop getting angry. You stop getting jealous. Stop getting depressed. That's renunciation. Delicious. Can't wait. That's first level junior school practice. One step at a time, please. Understand suffering at the grossest level. The suffering is suffering when the attachment doesn't get what it wants. Know you're sick of it. Stop causing it. Then you can go to high school. Second kind of suffering. This is really subtle. That's the suffering of change. And that's the suffering of, well, so the first one we call, in the ordinary world, we call the first one suffering. We call the second one happiness. So what we mean by happiness for Buddha is even a subtler, more tragic level of suffering. It's heartbreaking. So that takes time to see. It really does. The inner prison. As Rinpoche told one of all these young prisoners who wrote to us when I was doing the prison project, and they'd all write to Rinpoche, and he'd send these 18-page letters back with all this advice, and he'd say variations of this all the time. Your prison is nothing in comparison with the inner prison of ordinary people. He would talk about people who are in their cells 23 hours a day, being abused and attacked and living in nightmares with no chance of any freedom, living in their orange jumpsuits with 10 books on the inside of a pen and maniacs all around them for the rest of their life. That's what he's talking to, and they understand it. Your prison is nothing in comparison with the inner prison of ordinary people. And who's he talking about? Us, ordinary people. And then he said, the prison of attachment, the prison of anger, the prison of depression, the prison of pride, etc. And they get it, because they got no choice, my friends in prison. They're up against the wall. They can never get the grosser kind of, they can never be free of the grosser kind of suffering, the prison, but they're forced into their mind, like that woman in Florida I mentioned. You know. Finally, she said, I realised I couldn't change anything. Accused of murder. Husband get executed. She's innocent. 17 years on death row. Treated like an animal. Finally, I realised I couldn't change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I'm not a prisoner. I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell. I'm in a cave. She changed her mind. Unbelievable. She got out of the inner prison. You know. And all my friends in prison, whom I admire because of their practice, that's how they think. They realise. But we still think we're free, you see. We always think we can get the next cake, the next thing, the next husband, the next handbag, the next job. It looks like we can. We sit in misery. In our lousy jobs, our lousy relationships with the lousy husband, the lousy wife, the lousy friend, the lousy boss, you know, full of self-pity and paralysis. Not realising we just have to walk out the door. We don't have to have a key. But it's like we're in a prison that's worse. The nightmare of the delusions, you know. This is the inner prison, and it starts with attachment. Because you would not have anger if you didn't have attachment. You would not have jealousy or depression if you didn't have attachment. That's a fact. Buddha's model of the mind. When we get this, when we start to get to the root of it, understanding attachment, then we realise that the suffering of change calls it simply that. It changes into the gross suffering. But obviously that's just a label for it. But when we begin to understand attachment, we can see the suffering caused by it. It's so hard. As Rinpoche says, he calls renunciation. He says, you've got renunciation when just the thought of another moment of attachment, just the thought of it, is so disgusting. I've heard two things he says. It's like using used toilet paper. The other one he says is, it's like being in a septic tank. Like being in a sewer, okay? This is shocking. But this is when you understand attachment. So way to go. Don't get depressed because you don't see how the depth of your attachment. You've got to apparently won't give it up until you realise emptiness. It's so much more subtle, more pervasive than we can imagine. But begin to understand how pervasive and how subtle it is, how primordial. How deep. Attachment. Dissatisfaction. Hankering. Imagining. Manipulating to get. Getting. Expecting happiness. Keep having it until you're exhausted and it becomes into the gross suffering again. And the fact is when we think about this, every moment of what we call happiness that we've had in our lives, in this body of attachment, in a universe created by attachment is on the basis of getting what attachment wants. It's the only method we know to trigger any good feeling is to get an object of attachment. So the grosser level, obvious level, objects, things, sounds, smells, tastes, touch. But the subtle level, which they only really teach us in the university level, and compassion when they talk about this weird thing called the 8 worldly dharmas, the deeper level of attachment, the more primordial level. And the main ones of those are, the main one is the attachment to what people think about us. This is the most primordial. The most primordial. As this junkie in us, every millisecond, frantic to get what it wants, the nice things. That's the second kind of suffering. It's what we call happiness, but Buddha calls it an even deeper level of suffering. And it's what underpins and is the source of the first kind of suffering. That's the tragedy. I always quote that 40% of female people on this earth get murdered by the bloke in their bed next to them, pretty much. It's not meant to be against men. Why do you think you'd murder the person in the same bed as you? Because you're angry, hurt, resentful, freaked out, jealous. Why do you have that? Because you've got attachment. If there's no attachment, there's no anger. It's clear. We don't hear that. We don't think like that in our culture. When we get that, it's profound. So why anybody harms anybody out of anger, anguish, despair, freaked out is because of attachment not getting what it wants. So the third kind of suffering is called all-pervasive suffering, one term for it. And this is even more subtle, even harder to get our heads around. But basically, if we think that, we think of samsara as bigger than this human realms, many realms of existence, all caused by sentient beings, virtues or delusions. So if the first kind of suffering is not getting what attachment wants, or getting what attachment doesn't want, which is the gross kind, and if the second kind of suffering is getting what attachment wants, or the first kind is like being, if we take the analogy of being a junkie, attachment's being a junkie. So the first kind of suffering is when you don't get the junk. It's a nightmare, complete hell. The second kind of suffering is when you get the junk. The third kind of suffering is being born in the first place into a body caused by being a junkie. It's a junkie's body. It's got 5 senses, and the junkie mind, attachment, craves to fulfill the senses, to get satisfaction via the senses. And you're born as a junkie, in the body of a junkie, in a world made of heroin. The world is made of heroin. And the 5 objects of the senses is the heroin. So you're craving to get the 5 objects of the senses in order to get satisfaction. That's the third kind of suffering. So you quit the first one by stopping harming others. You quit the second by giving up attachment. You quit the third, being born in the first place in samsara, by realizing emptiness. One step at a time. That's why junior school, you've got to back off first, mind your own business, leave sentient beings alone. Get out of their heads, mind your own business. You are your business. Your mind, what's going on in there. That's already too advanced. First you control your body and speech. First you shut your mouth and you keep your hands to yourself. Zip your lip and keep your hands to yourself. That's the first level of practice. You use your mind to control your body and speech. Then you've harnessed the energy of your discipline, your energy of your body and speech. Now you can go to high school, second scope, and now you can get to the root of the problem, the delusions. That means you've got to have concentration, meditation, and learn Buddha's model of the mind. And then you start to unpack and unravel the causes of that, which is attachment of the delusions. So the first one is to stop harming others. Second, give up attachment. And then third, you finally get to realize emptiness. Cut the root of all the delusions. Cut the root of all the delusions. Ego grasping, which informs even attachment. So even though ego grasping, colloquial term for the root delusion, the root neurosis, the root mental illness. I forgot the beginning of the sentence. Sorry. That's the root one. That's the main one. But effectively in day-to-day life, because we're in this body of attachment. Attachment's the main cause of suffering. That's why death is so intense and powerful for us, because attachment's completely rampant at the time of death. Because we're losing everything we ever considered was true and real. Our sense of self, our body, our possessions, our people, our beloveds, and our reputation. Gone like a dream, you know. It's terrifying, unless we've dealt with it. Are there any questions?
Venerable.
Say your name first so we all know you.
Luke.
Can't see you down there.
Oh, sorry.
The red jumper. Who's on the red? I can only see half of you. There you go. Thank you. Pascal, that's Pascal. Oh, look at you. Yes, darling. Oh, yes. Go on, people. Go. What's your name again?
Sorry, are we...
You, darling. No, you. The gentleman. You.
Luke,
I'm just,
yes.
Luke, get
Sorry.
good, Luke. Talk.
Okay, say we're going to kill that mouse again.
Yeah.
This time we've chosen poison. We're going to kill with poison. We've seen the mouse come in.
Okay.
It eats the poison.
Yes.
It leaves.
Yes.
We don't see the mouse again. We rejoice it's dead.
That's then. Then what's the
Okay.
question?
So the mouse actually doesn't die.
Okay, so it's not a complete action.
So it's not a complete action.
But that just means a complete action is one that's got all the bits in together. It doesn't mean you didn't create heavy negative karma.
Okay.
Of course you did.
So the mouse goes on living, and eventually it does die, say years later.
But wait a minute, you're getting too complicated here. Please, darling. Look, it's getting a bit interesting, but it's kind of a bit intellectual. What's the point?
The point is, I see this karma as arising externally, like it comes, something is coming from that mouse dying, like our mind is no longer involved.
Darling, no,
once
you're
the
really
mouse
getting carried
dies.
away. Shush, 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 shush. You're going way off into la la land here. The point of the example is to show us what a complete karma is. It doesn't mean there's no negative karma just because all the conditions aren't there. A complete karma is a very specific one that sows a seed that'll produce many suffering future lives. So there'll be just as much suffering as a result, but it's just not labelled a complete karma, that's all. It's just, there's millions of kinds of karmas. This is an example of a complete action with all those things in place. So clearly if the mouse doesn't die immediately, but it dies later as a result of your action, it's still a complete action when it does die.
So our mind doesn't have to be involved to have
But your mind was involved when you did
karma.
it. We're not discussing your mind being involved when the mouse is dead. Your mind is involved when you do the action. The action is what we're talking about. The action of doing, of wanting to harm it, doing the action. That's when your mind's involved, isn't it? When your mind, the second point. That's the main point there. The fact that I die an agonising death and you've forgotten all about me is hardly relevant to the negative karma you've already created.
That's the motivation.
What's your problem, Luke?
Just then, what's the purpose of that complete karma? I mean,
God
I feel
Almighty,
like-
I told you. Okay. It's only 10 o'clock and I'm getting angry already. Sweetheart, the point of it. Luke, have you heard these teachings before?
Yes.
Good, okay. The main point is this, Luke. Every millisecond of whatever you think and do and say sows a seed and will ripen in the future as your happiness or your suffering. That's the key teaching. The key reason I pointed out a complete action is to point out the crucial role of your reason why you do something and how that is what causes the action you do to leave a negative seed in your mind which will produce a suffering result. That's the broader point of the teaching. It happens to be one that's called a complete action is one that will sow a seed in your mind and will ripen as multiple suffering rebirths for you in the future. That's the point of a complete action. If it's not complete, there'll still be masses of suffering, honey. Believe me. Are we communicating or not? Which bit don't you understand?
For the mouse to live, I'm sorry, I'm going to get into this again with the mouse. Years pass and it dies.
Okay,
complete karma is then complete. It's completed once the object
that's right, precisely.
dies.
That's what, when it dies, it's complete. Yeah, that's right.
So it still
then-
feels like to me there's something coming from the side.
What? Sweetie, the mouse is not you. One of the crucial components of your complete action of killing has to be a living being, which is outside you. That's pretty obvious from day one. Killing means a sentient being, right? Which is outside you, isn't it? Would you agree a mouse is outside you?
Yes.
Well then, what are you worried about? Whether it dies today or next week, it's not the point. It's outside you no matter what happens. Would you agree with that point?
Yes.
So that's hardly an issue. A sentient being necessarily is another being whom you decide to kill, and it dies. Whether it dies today or next week is hardly the issue. In fact, the karma would be worse. It's probably suffering all those years. So for you, the karma is even worse because of its suffering. Are we communicating now, it? Okay, darling. Any more questions? Yes. No, yes. Yes.
No, I'm just scratching my head.
I know. You.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, darling.
Hi. My name's Matt.
Hello, Matt.
Yes, can you explain the suffering of being attached to being smart?
Oh, sweetheart. It's a really good point. Okay.
You struck me when you said one of the greatest attachments is the way other people feel.
That's right. Okay, this is a minefield, Matt. Okay, you heard it. So listen, in the very beginning stages of the practice, junior school level, it's all just sort of control your behaviour. Because of attachment, you go rape somebody. Because of anger, you go kill somebody. Because of attachment, you steal something. So the very first level is back off, use your mental energy to control, to discipline your behaviour. Right? So you start to extrapolate from that, and you got to realise, well, that also means I shouldn't stuff 17 pieces of chocolate cake in, because it's all about harming you. You're not harming anybody else. So you start to realise that even that is going to cause suffering because you're feeding your own attachment. So this is the first level, is all about attachment to the sense of objects. You with me? That we've got to get that one first. That's the gross level, the tip of the iceberg. But as we get more advanced and go more deep into our minds, we're going to start to see the deeper levels of attachment, and this is the one that they even teach only in the Bodhisattva path, and there's different levels of it. But the one we're talking about, the subtlest one, the deepest one, the most primordial, the one that they say, the yogis have given up sex, drugs and rock and roll. They're in the mountains meditating, but they're still thinking about what the people in the village are thinking about them. So the more we look into our mind, we're going to see that this yearning, this craving, since we're conceived, this craving to be seen in a good light by others, drives most of our decisions, is the source of our happiness and is the source of our pain when we don't get it. Even if you look at we call sexual relationships. That sounds so dramatic and marvellous and joy and bliss and plenty of body work, But you look at it. What do you think it is? When you're looking at me with starry eyes and think I'm the most divine thing since sliced bread and praise me and love me, that's the bliss. Forget the sex bit. It's being approved of, being seen and heard by somebody. This is our deepest craving, which implies our worst suffering is this sense of, my way of putting it, having attachment, having this unhappy sense of self. Okay, the most advanced level, Buddha says, this view of being a separate self, this actual production of separate selves running around this universe, all lost, is finally what goes when you become an enlightened being. There's no longer a sense of a separate self. It sounds so abstract to us. Then your mind is completely interconnected with all sentient beings. There's no longer a miserable little sense of a lonely, bereft, broken-hearted me, which is ego grasping. So the main delusion is to get what that little me wants. So therefore, the biggest one is to get the objects, the gross ones, get the objects, get the touch, the smell, the taste, shove it all in. The deepest one is every time we're craving every second to be seen by another, the assumption being, I don't think I'm anybody until someone hears me. It's like we're empty. It's like we're nothing. It's like we've got to look in a mirror. Oh, I exist. So whenever we're walking around like empty vampires, no one loves me, no one likes me, no one listens to me, no one hears me. So in other words, we don't think we're real until you hear my thoughts. It's kind of bizarre. What makes your thoughts so delicious? What makes your thoughts worthless until I hear them? It's very weird. Think about it. You've got thoughts, but they're nothing until I hear them. Oh, I must be real. Matt hears my thoughts. But that's how deep this attachment is. It pervades every one of us. So the concept of success, of being liked, is all about this one. It's the deepest delusion, the closest, I'd say, to ego grasping. And when ego grasping is gone, that one finally is gone, it seems. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to
this
that.
This is a massive one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
That's right, exactly. So you can imagine the consequence of not having that one. You are blissful, you are content, you're fulfilled, and you're naturally empathetic. But in our culture, it's kind of interesting. You'd be called autistic if you had that one. Because we define ourselves as these social beings, which means we define ourselves in needing others to fulfill us. Buddha says that's samsara. It's terrifying. It's very interesting. A lot of kids these days, little kids are being recognised as reincarnated lamas, as yogis from past lives. And there's one I can think of. this little boy, he was considered autistic by all the locals, the psychologists, and the mother was a bit distressed. She's a Buddhist. So I remember talking to her about it, and she's a student of Lama Zopa's. And so I said, for God's sake, write to Rinpoche and just discuss, And then this little boy, he's like 4 already, little genius, up in the morning, going onto YouTube, learning Spanish numbers backwards, that kind of brilliant genius little mind, which is what the world, and then looks like no social skills, looks like kind of fierce, looks like no social skills, right, according to the West, which means no jealousy, no neediness to be loved and stroked by others, neurotic. So anyway, I said, why don't you write to this Tibetan doctor? These doctors are like lamas, they're amazing. And there's one doctor, one of His Holiness's doctors, in Dharamsala. And I said, please send him a photo and just tell him the symptoms. And he wrote back and said, of course, that's how yogis behave. Because he doesn't have the usual neediness. 2 little girls, 2 little children fight, all needy, sharing toys, and they get upset and they shout and they kick and they get jealous, then they make up. That's considered normal. That's called samsara for the Buddha. And another little girl I can think of, who also she'd been recognised informally as a reincarnation of Geshe Lama Kontrok. She looks like shy, which means no social skills. Because she's a little blissful holy being. She doesn't need to be approached and stroked by others. So it's very scary. Keep your children, I'm not trying to be Tom Cruise or anything, but keep your kids away from psychiatrists. Our assumptions of what is normal are a little bit depressing, Normal is being angry, jealous, neurotic, crying, having mental breakdown, and getting better again. Oh, what a terrible normal that is. Are we communicating,
Yes,
Matt?
very much.
Okay. Yes.
I'm perplexed because, as I think of what you're saying, I'm thinking, geez,
Thinking what?
I have to quit my relationships.
Oh, I see. No, don't chuck the baby out with the
I have to not
bathwater.
have sex anymore.
No, you can be more skillful than that. You can have your cake and eat it too, baby. Don't worry about it. It's got to be skillful. No, I'm joking. I'm not joking.
Because I've heard stories about, somebody who decided, her husband was alcoholic, and she decided to stay.
That's right.
Buddhist, and she
Exactly.
decided to stay
That's right.
in the
That's right.
relationship. I think it's really
That's exactly right.
And I'm thinking, okay,
You got- okay.
how do you renounce certain things?
Yes.
And
First step is you've got to know where you're at, isn't it? First step is you've got to know you've got to know where you're at in your own progress. So if you are a kind of person who's completely needy and a victim and has no self-respect, which means that there's masses of attachment and neediness and angry with the drunken husband and obsessed with the drunken husband and complaining about him and wanting him to see you and love you and get better so you can feel more, which is a normal person, then I would suggest you do not stay. You have enough courage to pull yourself up and say, okay, I can't change him, back off, go, leave, bye dear, I'm leaving. That's self-respect. Look at most relationships. That's why you get to the point of murdering each other, because you haven't got enough courage to even do that. Most people sit in the misery, waiting for the person to change, feeling sorry for themselves, going out and bad-mouthing, and then going back like a moth to a flame and getting more abuse. I mean, we are really sad, sentient beings. So you've got to know where you're at. So that's my friend. She's got this husband who's a quiet drunk, basically. The sweetest man, never harms a flea. Dear, kind person, brings in the money for the family. They're like grandparents now. She decided years ago, she's a Buddhist, student of Lama Zopa, she decided years ago that it was appropriate and necessary for her to stay there. But she stopped being a moaning, complaining, why don't you change, dear, and got her own life. Once she decided that's where she had to be, because she was like his heir. He needed her for existence, and she's got a relationship. So she has her own life. She has the grandkids, she goes to retreat, she goes here, she goes there, and she decided not. But she was capable of that. We've got to know where you're at. What choices you can make. Do you understand?
yes,
This is the basis of your decision.
got it.
Yeah. What else? Questions? Yes.
So, as we're speaking today, and we get to number 3, the all-pervasive suffering.
Yes.
And so we're like totally living in junkie society.
That's right.
And so, I'm thinking, is it possible? I mean, how do you like totally detach from?
Okay. You can't.
I mean, it's
The same here. You've got to know
Yeah.
where you're at, darling. One step at a time. You can't say, well, you don't not even learn 1 + 1 is 2 yet, and you're worried about relativity. One step at a time, baby. You go according to your pace. That's what I'm saying here. You can only totally detach when you're at that level. So you've got to aim for it. You've got to know the steps. So then according to where you're at in those steps, you do that. Be reasonable and patient and humble with yourself and appropriate. But when you understand intellectually where you're heading, relativity, you've got to know where you're at. Do you see my point? You can't leap to it, can you?
No.
The same here. It's natural, incremental progression.
So at the point that you feel like you, I mean, that's when you seek advice from your Lama or your teacher if you need to take another step.
Well,
suppose.
you don't have to. If you know the answer yourself, you don't need to ask, do you?
Just your inner teacher.
No, no, not in a teacher. It's too cosmic. If you learn the basic principles of mathematics, yeah, the principles,
Yeah.
then you don't need to go and ask the teacher every time what the answer is, do you? Why not?
Because you already know.
Precisely. That's your inner mathematician. I want to be cosmic about it. You've got the methods. You've got multiplication, subtraction, all the different trips. Oh, please, what's 1 plus 7? And you go back next day. Oh, what's 1 plus 9? You don't need to. He's giving you the methods, how to work it out yourself. And if you can't work it out, then you ask. Do you see? But it'll be evident to you. If you're moving along in mathematics, you can see the next step. If you're doing it properly. Do you see?
Yeah, stages.
That's right. I can't stress that strong enough. But we're not used to thinking that, you know. Do you understand? Then you're reasonable, then you're content. Yeah, we want to suddenly leap to the end result and kind of wonder how to get there, you know. Then we have a panic attack, we realise we can't, then we go kill ourselves. Well, you get my point. One step at a time, baby.
Yes.
Okay. And be happy with your progress. Don't always think, oh, I'm not in grade 2, I'm so depressed. Then you get to grade 2, I'm not in grade 3, I'm so depressed. And until you're grade 47, oh, I'm still not in grade 48, I'm still depressed. Rejoice, you've just been in grade 1 and get excited. Now you go, and you rejoice each step of the way. That's really unbelievably important. I cannot stress that enough either. Paul Amiyeshi, from the very beginning, when he saw these pathetic self-pity, low, demented self-pity hippies, all he ever did, wasn't it, was try to pick us up like pathetic little things and make us feel good and give us parties and cheesecake and pizzas and all the way he talked. We always used to think, oh, Amiyeshi must like pizza. Give me a break. He tried to make us happy because you can see all this low self-esteem, all this kind of twisted self-pity. I'm hopeless, I'm bad, I'm evil, I'm attached. Trying to get us to rejoice, you know, in our good qualities. So then it's easy to see the bad ones, isn't it? What else? Yes.
Hi, Venerable.
Hello.
My name's Ben.
Hello,
I just had a
Ben.
question about the relationship between karma and delusion.
Yes.
If you're developing good karma or good actions,
Yes, by putting positive seeds in your mind, by being virtuous and refraining. Well, first refraining from doing harmful things.
Yes.
That's virtue at the first level. Virtue, it's called the morality of restraint. Yes.
if you're having good actions or good karma, does that mean can you still be acting out of delusions, or does that mean you're not acting out of delusions?
Well, each action is its own thing. So every millisecond you're doing an action, and it's all highly complex. Each millisecond there's an intention, there's an object, there's an action, there's a result. If it's a complete one, or there's variations of these. So every millisecond there's one kind or other of a seed being planted in your mind. And in one moment, in 1 minute, you could have 47 virtuous ones and 49 non-virtuous ones. Each one is its own distinct thing. It's intensely subtle. When we talk about a complete action, like, you know, Luke's question, it's very simple, broad stroke, the components, but it's highly nuanced. But every millisecond of every intention is then the ones that are followed through, motivated by a delusion or a virtue, and followed through by the action. Each one is slightly different, and we're sowing crazy, immense numbers of these. That's why the more conscious we are, the more we can effectively, consciously sow virtuous seeds. And the more, and especially when you go to the Bodhisattva path, we understand the power of the motivation. Then even negative actions in their nature will be transformed by doing them with a virtuous motivation, like such as eating food. It's an action motivated completely by attachment. It's an animal action. Or, you see, interestingly, it's a bit of a shock to us. All the negative tendencies we have, and we'll go into this now, the model of the mind, they're animal actions. The craving for sex, food, sleep, comfort, they're animal actions. They're from animal realm. They're tendencies left over from the animals. The human ones are the virtues. They're our saving grace. So the more we understand motivation, then when we get to the Bodhisattva path, okay, in the very first level of practice, like junior school, the first scope, the Hinayana level, there's no wiggle room. Just back off. Don't stuff 14 pieces of cake in. Just because there's no real talk there about motivation transforming actions. You just don't eat too much cake. You don't have too much sex. You don't have too much money. You have a cautious, low-key, disciplined lifestyle. But when you get to the Bodhisattva path, you can kind of have your cake and eat it too to really understand it. So, for example, eating is its nature an animal action. The craving, food, the wish to eat food, we say, oh, it's to be healthy. It's a load of rubbish. That's an intellectually implied thing. It's just driven by craving. People who have no attachment for food don't even think about food. They're going to be told to eat, you know. We don't even think about food. If we think about food all the time, it's because we're attached to it. So we're always going to eat. And so it's the energy, the action of putting the food in the mouth, in its own nature, is a negative action by definition. Because it's driven by the craving to get the food in the mouth. It's driven by delusion. An action driven by a delusion, in general, is a non-virtuous action. It's just its nature. It's not moralistic, it's just its nature. So then in the Bodhisattva path, before you shove the food in the mouth, even like we did this morning, for 30 seconds you have a few virtuous thoughts. You imagine sentient beings, you imagine offering to them. That's stupendous. You sow amazing, powerful, virtuous seeds in your mind. Then you probably have just as much attachment when you eat the food, but you put some virtue on top. And then gradually that programming your mind in virtue will eventually gradually begin to actually lessen the attachment, and you'll start spontaneously eating for sentient beings. It's a way of training your mind in a new way, you know. So it's a way of transforming what would be a deluded action into something virtuous. It's so skillful. And when we understand this, you can get the best of both worlds. And I'm not being stupid here. It's just skillful means, you know. Ordinary actions like sex, clothing, sleeping, eating, going to the toilet, they're animal actions in their nature, according to Buddha's model. We do them because we've got this body. So and that's why Lama Zopa never stops giving us these methods. But we just don't hear him, you know. To have virtuous, to train your mind to change the motivation. So if you look at a normal action of eating, like I said about the killing one, if you put, it's a dependent arising. One action of eating is the same as the killing of the mouse. Is the object, the action, the mind involved, the intention, the motivation, the doing of the action, the result. Eating is the same. Everything's the same. But if you look into the one, 2C, motivation, and you pull out the brick in this little edifice called attachment, and you put in the brick called bodhicitta, that's what transforms the whole action into something virtuous. Can you see that? Do you understand the point I'm saying? I know I talk fast, but you get it. When you do the normal action of eating the food, it's like the killing of the mouse. It's less severe, obviously, because you're not harming yourself, sending being except yourself. There's the same. The object is there, the food. There's the second one, intention. 2A is recognise that's the pea I'll put in my mouth. 2B, intention. I will eat that pea. 2C, motivation, attachment. 3, do the action. Put the pea in and it goes in the belly. Completion of the action. That's a complete action of eating. You with me? Mm-hmm. So the normal motivation, attachment is negative action by definition. You stop before you shove the pea in. You put in bodhicitta instead. I'm going to eat this, do this for sentient beings. It's not very meaningful yet, but you still do it. That completely transforms that action. Completely transforms it into something virtuous. You have to hear it logically, you know. Understand the mechanics of it, how it works. It's just some religious idea. Anyway, are we communicating down there? Yeah, Ben? Okay. Yes.
My name is Sandra.
Sandra.
I can understand and I can accept and I can look at my whole life. I'll be 77 the end of this month. So there's a lot of things have happened in my 77 years, and I absolutely get it. You know how the law of karma has been working in my life. But when I look at these refugees in Syria, and I see how can I want to blame the United States.
That's right, of course.
See,
naturally, of course we do. We're dying to blame somebody.
Well, and giant masses of suffering, and is all that their own personal karma?
We have. Okay, let me again purposely ask you in a different way. Can you see right now there are groups of people in certain countries who are experiencing pleasure? Every day the sun gets up, the sun goes down, the people have jobs, they go to work, they go home, they have education, they have parties, they have food.
Yes.
Have you noticed that?
Absolutely.
You've noticed that. How come you're not asking me the question about, you mean it's their own fault that they're happy? And you stop in your tracks. Ask it, imagine it, think about it. Ask the question, you mean they caused that? Well, honey, yes. It's very simple. So that's why often you're almost indicating it. Many people say, can have such compassion for other people, but not for myself, people say. No, you're not saying that one. But somehow you can see your life's been good, right? To some extent.
Absolutely.
Well, then are you happy to own responsibility for that? that you must have created virtue?
Yes.
Well, then how come it's so
Yes.
painful for you to recognise that little children, innocent children, quote unquote, must have been before they stopped breathing, before they, a year before they were born, or 6 months before they were born, or 3 months, whatever, they were some wretched person who was negative and harmful? That's the part that's so hard for us to hear.
Right.
This lovely story of Shariputra, all the Lamas, just an oral tradition, so God knows what the original story was back at the time of the Buddha, but you hear these variations of it. Rinpoche tells it in his death book. But Shariputra, this disciple of the Buddha, who was apparently really best at emptiness, and they obviously had clairvoyance as well, it's a low-level realisation. The Buddha says we've all had it in countless lives. So he's walking by doing his arms round, and he sticks his nose in some house, and he sees a scenario, and he goes, the son nurses his enemy while he eats his father's flesh, and he kicks his mother who eats her husband's bones. What a farce samsara is. And what he saw was a bloke, a man, nursing a baby, my little baby, stroke, who was the reincarnation of the fellow down the road whom he murdered because he raped his wife. So now, due to his attachment to his wife, this person's born as this person's baby, nurses his enemy, while he eats the fish, who was the reincarnation of his daddy, who was attached to killing the fish in the back pond, so now is reborn as the fish, and he's eating his daddy, while he's kicking the dog, who was the reincarnation of his mummy, because she was attached to that place and got born as a dog there, is kicking his mother while she eats her husband's bones. What a farce samsara is. I mean, your response is a typical one. It's absolutely typical. And then when we look at it, we have to unpack the assumption behind your response. And the assumption is that a child who didn't do anything wrong in this life
Doesn't deserve.
Has to be innocent. And that's based on the assumption of the materialist view that child began in the mother's womb. Or God created that child. So they began at that point. So according to that logic, you are right to ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? There is no answer.
No.
If you're a Christian, there is an answer. God has his plan and you have faith in him. And I think that's amazing if you can have it. But the materialists, there literally is no answer. There is no answer from science yet why bad things happen to good people, which is exactly why we are so traumatized, so full of suffering, so mentally ill, full of depression, full of rage, full of anxiety. This is the reason why we suffer so badly in the materialist world, because there are no answers. So Buddha says, hey, check your assumptions, baby. Maybe change your view. Take the hypothesis your mind is actually not physical. Take the hypothesis that you created yourself. Take the hypothesis that you're not the product of a creator or mummy or daddy. And this view is coming from that assumption. So they're all just assumptions. So why not, we can come up with new ones and try them out, isn't it?
No, I think the place that I get stuck is that when I see all that massive amounts of suffering, and certainly, we can go back to the concentration camps and all of that, is that I think my fear is that by acknowledging that is karma, that there would be some kind of coldness in it.
I hear you, darling.
But I see where the compassion now
that's right.
comes in.
Precisely.
Exactly.
See, and again, the assumption behind the coldness, they deserve it.
Yeah.
And you see, that's the view we have of compassion in our world. That's why we only have compassion for animals and children. They're the only innocent victims we can find. Because our view needs an innocent victim. Because if somebody deserved it, well, then they deserve it, don't they? Let them suffer. That's our view. Even that view is underpinned by that wrong assumption.
Sure.
So we have to unpack our assumptions. But our tragedy is we don't even realise we have assumptions. We just think what we think is true. As Lama Zopa says, bad enough that we misinterpret the entire world. But the worst thing is we believe that our misinterpretation is the truth. Do you understand? That's right. So we've got to unpack, which means you've got to confront, be brave. Don't get panic-stricken, don't get nervous. Just keep unpacking, keep looking deeper. Check the assumption, be brave enough not to grasp onto it like a vampire. This is true. Because the fact is, Buddha might be wrong. We have to find out ourselves. So we've got to be courageous, delve in deep. Do you understand? It was my friend who, a therapist, said, doing this job is having your hands in your own shit. It's very, very true, is it not? I prefer to say it's tasting your own vomit. I think we need a tea break, don't you?
We do. Yes.